Hello, and welcome to another podcast of Jurors in Disguise. My name is Mary Rose Peterson, and I own Covert Officer Investigations. What do we do? I'm glad you asked. We look for the jurors who lied during jury selection so that they would be chosen for the jury, and that then they could ensure that our clients would be convicted. Basically, we look for liars for a living. In this podcast, I'm going to feature the story of one of our clients. His name is Brandon Michael Ward. He wrote a book called Stand Your Ground, a story of small town politics, police corruption, and court injustice. As you can see, Brandon was a Marine at the time this happened. On the back cover, it says, "This is the true story of a young Marine defined by discipline, loyalty, and honor, whose courage in the face of danger unleashed a nightmare he could never have imagined. Attacked by two men, he fought back in self-defense. One assailant lost his life. But instead of justice, what followed was a devastating spiral into a system riddled with betrayal. Police misconduct, corrupt motives, and a deeply flawed criminal justice system conspired to distort the truth and punish the very person it was meant to protect." I hope that you will all go to Amazon and order a copy of this book. It is beautifully written. The way that he describes the criminal justice system and the flaws in it, I couldn't have said it better. Brandon also gives a very detailed play-by-play of what happened the night that this horrific scene took place. Stand your ground. I'm not going to take away from Brandon's words, but I just will give you a little backstory, a little setup here. Brandon, as a Marine, would stay with his girlfriend's parents and her name was Samantha, on the weekends. So on the weekends, Brandon would go to their home and hang out with his girlfriend and her parents. Brandon and Samantha like to go camping. There's lots of places to go camping around this area. There was one particular weekend, though, that the weather wasn't cooperating, so they looked for something else to do. Samantha had overheard about a party, thought that her friends would be there, some of them at least, and even though Brandon didn't know anyone that was going to be there, didn't think that he would, he decided, okay, we'll go. He wanted to please her, so he reluctantly agreed to go to the party. Over the course of the evening, things turned dark, and Brandon found himself back at Samantha's home without Samantha and having to defend himself from two young men who came with sinister motives. Brandon was a Marine. Brandon was trained in combat. Brandon knew how to defend himself. Brandon had a pocket knife in his pants pocket. I can't even imagine, as strong as he was and with all of the training, I can't even imagine having two people you don't know coming at you in the dark with motives that were not only not honorable, but had bragged about the fact that they were going to kill him. Like I said, in my opinion, Brandon defended himself against assailants. Get the book. Read the book. In fact, I'm going to make here so you can see it while I talk. So we were hired by Brandon's family in 2020 to investigate his jury. On January 7th of 2021, I wrote the report of findings, and the very first paragraph says, on October 4th and 5th, 2010, a jury voir dire was conducted in Santa Rosa County, Florida, to begin the trial of Brandon Michael Ward. At the beginning of the voir dire, prospective juror William Harrison Young was given an oath by the clerk, where he swore under penalty of perjury to answer truthfully when questioned during the voir dire. At the conclusion of the selection process, based on his lack of honest responses, Mr. Young was falsely chosen to serve on Mr. Ward's jury. Juror Young sat through Mr. Ward's trial and was elected to be the foreperson of the jury. Foreperson Young then led the other 5 jurors in deliberating where a guilty verdict was decided, which he then delivered to the court. This is all public record. You are welcome to go to Brandon's docket. You will find, I believe my report of findings is still there. I'm not going to read all of the things that the judge and the state attorney asked of the jurors, but suffice it to say that they were asked to be honest. I just, I don't understand why you would go into a court of law, swear to tell the truth, and be forthcoming in your answers, to speak up, and then lie, knowing that a young man's life is on the line. Why would you do that? Well, I have some ideas, and we've been able to uncover some of the reasons why some of our jurors that we found who lied during the voir dire, we've been able to uncover some of the reasons why they lied. But in this case, I am just absolutely stunned because this particular juror, in my opinion, knew exactly what he was doing. He had been in the Navy for 27 years at the time of Brandon's trial. 27 years. 27 years. So you have a Marine on trial for his life, and then you have a Navy veteran who is serving as the foreperson. So that's the beginning of my report. What we uncovered was that the foreperson, William Young, was a Navy rescue swimmer. And how did we do that? Well, we have dozens of programs and public record searches that we do use to uncover the information that we have uncovered. We also, one of the key factors in our investigation is the verdict form that is signed by the foreperson. So we utilize this to ensure that based on this, and we're not handwriting analysts, but when we found this power of attorney signed by William Harrison Young, William H. Young, in, let's see, let me make sure I say this right, I'm not Santa Rosa County, yes. So when we found, here's the verdict form, and then here's his signature on the power of attorney that he gave to his wife. Now, I'm not a handwriting analyst, but that looks very close to me. Not only, we didn't stop there, of course, we compared the things that Mr. Young said during the voir dire to the other pieces of information that we were able to uncover, and we determined that everything lined up, not just his signature, but the things that he said about his personal life lined up as well. So we started looking into the rescue swimmers and exactly what they do. I don't know about you, but I've seen the helicopters coming in and these guys in full gear jumping out with swim fins, snorkel, the whole thing, and their vest, which contains a knife, jumping out of helicopters into violent oceans to save lives. These are phenomenal people. In fact, I learned through this research that Navy rescue swimmers and Coast Guard rescue swimmers are deployed to save Navy SEALs when they get in trouble. When they are in distress, they will deploy a Navy rescue swimmer team to save that life. That's how dedicated these men and women are, and that's the level of training that they have. This level of training, which you will see, was completely minimized during the voir dire by Foreperson Young. I learned that the motto of the aviation rescue swimmer community is "so others may live." so others may live. And in all of their training videos, they boast, I save lives for a living. And praise God. That's awesome. In fact, I'm in such awe of what this four-person does for a living, did for a living, that it made it very difficult to even consider the fact that he wasn't truthful. The thought was so foreign to me that this case took us nearly 6 months to complete because I just couldn't believe what I was finding. Another thing that it says on the aviation rescue swimmers website, it says aviation rescue swimmers are a tight-knit group dedicated to being the top helicopter emergency response unit in the world. On the Navy Crow online site, there's a reference to the search and rescue corpsman. It states, quote, rescue swimmers also must have skills to provide basic pre-hospital life support for rescued individuals. And as part of their training, candidates must complete an emergency medical training course. This is not an ordinary EMT course. If you are exposed to high seas, rough terrain, and other dangers, an ordinary EMT will not survive. The training you are seeking is hardcore physical and mental training that will challenge you to your core. In fact, Search and Rescue Swimmer School boasts more than a 50% attrition rate. But know that your training will help save your life and the lives of the ocean's victims.
We train at the hardest level possible. That way, when the rescues come, we are fully prepared to execute our mission to the highest level possible. It's not tough to be here. It's great to be here. It was tough getting here, and that's what breeds it in. You have to go through a process. Our training's extremely tough to become a rescue swimmer. Swim every day, a lot of endurance, and you just gotta want it. I like to call it train like you fight. If you're going to encounter a certain situation or use certain devices, then you need to use those in training.
We'll never be able to put the amount of stress on them that they're going to experience out in the real world. I mean, we'll never be able to replicate that type of stress. We will use different tools to make them feel the fire so they see how they react, underneath that pressure.
Right now, our difference that we make is training these students at this school. We take it one step at a time. We're going to be the ones replacing us in the fleet. They're ready to take on any challenge at any time, anywhere in the world.
Yet, when the state attorney asked Foreperson Young, quote, your medical training, what does it consist of? End quote. Foreperson Young said, I was an EMT trainer at the Rescue Swimmer School in Pensacola. They took 2 instructors usually, and they sent us through the military EMT school. And I never worked as an EMT out in the... I only took care of students, water aspiration, that kind of thing. Never the kind of trauma that you guys mentioned earlier yesterday. Really? So you would compare your training, which is described as challenging you to your core, as not being as serious or intense as a normal paramedic arriving at a scene where someone has missed out. Well, I find that impossible to believe, Foreperson Young. Further, the prospective jurors were also asked by the state attorney during the voir dire, quote, what persons have had training in the use of a knife or knives in either attacking another person in the military or in defense, such as martial arts or the military? Anyone who has had a knife training? Foreperson Young said nothing. Somebody spoke up and asked, do you mean military training? And the state attorney said, yes, if you have had knife training in the military, I'm interested, end quote. Again, Foreperson Young said nothing. And for a third time, state attorney said, anybody else? Knife training, military, or otherwise? Crickets, crickets, crickets. So then I started looking into what rescue swimmers do with knives. How do they use knives? And was that honest when he did not speak up about having knife training? I did quite a bit of research. I spoke to several people, uh, former rescue swimmers, people who were current rescue swimmers, instructors at rescue swimmer schools. In fact, I spoke to a former Coast Guard rescue swimmer named Dan. He said, "We were issued multiple knives for use, standard U.S. diver's knife with a leg sheath, a Benchmade AFO for our harness, along with a Jane hook and a Spyderca rescue clip for our flight suit. We were trained to cut lines as a last resort, and our motto is so others may live, in case you want to incorporate that somehow," he said. So I found that that is a common motto theme across all of these websites, was so others may live. Foreperson Young was trained and had for 27 years served in the Navy as a rescue swimmer and then as a rescue swimmer instructor. Why? So that he could save lives. Knives were not used to take lives. In fact, I spoke to a Petty Officer Brown. He stated that upon graduation, the rescue swimmers are given 2 knives, which I've already described. He also said that the students are taught never, even though the knives are on their person and it's the only weapon they carry going into any sort of combat distress situation, they are taught never to use their knives as weapons. So I don't know what was going through Foreperson Young's mind during the Vordier and trial, but if it were me, I would have been horrified that a Marine used a pocket knife to stab people. I wouldn't have even been paying attention to the details or the facts of the case, which show that Brandon was defending himself. And if Brandon had not stabbed Joey and Joseph, Brandon would very likely not be here today. We found quite a bit of Facebook pages. We actually found Foreperson Young's Facebook page. He's standing there holding the wooden trophy fin from rescue school. That was in November 2009. I also found on the U.S. Navy search and rescue site, so others may live. This is their motto. And you see what's in the background? 2 knives. They carry knives on their person because then, yes, they use them to pop life rafts and to cut cords of parachutes when someone is in the water with a parachute. But it's also there as a defense tool if needed, because it's the only weapon on their person, and it is actually in a special place on their vest, which I'm going to show at the end of this. I'm going to show you a video that outlines what does a Navy rescue swimmer carry on his person at all times. You're going to find out, but not like from me, from an actual Navy rescue swimmer. One of the things I found on a Facebook group said a former instructor named Dustin, I'll leave his last name out, he wrote the following chant, followed by saying, quote, "If you were a student on my team while I taught there, you ran to this one." And I'm not going to attempt to have a cadence here, but it does rhyme. So HH-60 headed off the ship, rescue swimmer gonna take a little trip, flying hard in a combat zone, don't even know if I'm ever coming home. Got my mask, fins, snorkel, and my knife. Jump out the door to save another life. Hoist him up, bring him back. Then the enemy starts to attack, firing back with my door gun. Boy, this rescue is fun. Another life saved, a medal on my chest. Again, I'm in awe of what they do, and I'm thankful. I'm so thankful for them. But this one, convicted an innocent man, or I should say, hoped to. I was a foreperson once. I've talked about that in former podcasts. I was a foreperson of a jury, and I'm telling you, it is not hard to spin a jury. By the time we got in that jury room, deliberation room on Friday, Nobody wanted to hang around and talk about it. They wanted to eat their free lunch, vote guilty, sign the verdict form, and go home. I made them sit there and talk about it, even though I wasn't convinced that these two young men that were on trial were not guilty of what they did. I wasn't convinced of that at all. I was, in fact, convinced that they had done what they were accused and convicted of. So it's not hard for Foreperson Young to get in that room and only have 5 other people. It's not difficult. I don't think it was difficult at all for him to convince them. And that, do I know what happened? No. That's the beautiful part about the deliberation room. We'll never know because you can't talk about it. That's another flaw in our system. You know, if jurors could come forward and talk about maybe the biased person who put pressure on them in the deliberation room to vote guilty when they had questions that they wanted answers to, but this person just wanted to vote guilty and go home. Maybe, just maybe, our clients, all of those accused, would get a fair trial. But you know, that's not how our criminal justice system works. You're not allowed to talk about what happened in the deliberation room. In fact, I have a friend who was a juror recently, and she got in the deliberation room, and two of the jurors started talking about how they lied during the voir dire, and they were victims of abuse, and that they wanted to hang the person in the courtroom. I mean, that's just they were not having it. They guilty, guilty, guilty. She was horrified because she used to work with us. She knows what we do. She tried to reach out later to the defense attorney and the prosecutor and say, look, you've got jurors who lied on here. And do you know that the judge threatened to arrest her and put her in prison because she didn't want to come back and go back in that room with the liars? That's what happens in jury deliberations. Found another Facebook page. This says students at the Aviation Rescue Swimmer School drill on emergency first aid procedures with their instructor, aviation structural mechanic first class Will Young. It says the physically arduous 4-week course of instruction trains enlisted air crewmen as rescue swimmers for search and rescue operations at sea and ashore. And there he is. But he doesn't know anything about hardcore EMT procedures. Here's a picture of one of the knives that they carry on their person. Does that look harmless to you? Looks like a weapon to me. Here's another picture of Foreperson Young in the pool instructing for the students. Sorry. Here's another picture of William H. Young with these students. You can imagine what he's telling them. One of the students actually commented, and I won't say exactly what he said, Foreperson Young liked to say, but he said, one of the absolute most motivated people I've ever met. Motivated. And the Foreperson. Here's another picture of Foreperson Young with his students. One of the students said, the dreaded personal attention of PO1 Young. He was my favorite instructor. He yelled 24/7, smoked like a chimney, and could still crush us into the ground with PT. Another wrote, Dave, you forgot to mention he would drink 3 to 4 pots of coffee a day. Pure animal. That's who Brandon had in his jury deliberation room as the foreperson, guiding the other jurors to a guilty verdict. Here's another one. Foreperson Young. Showing him how it's done. Somebody said motivation. Another one says William H. Young, exclamation points. And then later, William H. Young commented and said, anyone know what year this was? And Samantha below that said, not sure, but you are quite the legend. Huh. To which Foreperson Young commented, LOL, not me. Somebody else said, yes, the legend. Most external motivating person I've ever met. And another one said, I can just hear him screaming. On the same page, someone else wrote later in the comments, they need a pic of his purple face screaming with motivation. Brandon Ward's foreperson, William H. Young. 27 years in the Navy. Okay, so here's more to my report, but I think you get the picture. So what happened next? Well, Brandon's family hired an attorney who wrote a motion. In fact, they hired a famous attorney. Michael Ufferman is, I think, the best post-conviction attorney in the entire state of Florida, maybe the whole country. And those are not just my words. Michael Ufferman filed a motion asking the court for a hearing, juror interview, new trial, something to get Brandon's case reopened. And the day that I found Brandon's docket on the Santa Rosa Clerk of Court, it said case reopened. It had been closed all those years, and now it was reopened. That was a really exciting day. In fact, I screenshotted that and I sent it to Brandon's mom, who I've been talking to for years, 5 years now. And we celebrated because I said, how can they not send him home? After what we found, how can you disagree that his jury was tainted and that the verdict was not what should have happened in this case? How can you deny that? Well, unfortunately, in her final order on motion for post-conviction relief, Judge Darlene Dickey did. She denied it. I'll just read two little things. She said, the defendant asserts that Juror Young was dishonest in failing to answer that he had had knife training during this questioning. According to Ms. Peters, and I love how they refer to me, they rarely get my name right. And they always call me Ms., knowing that I helped bring my husband home. I'm very, very married. Very married. In fact, I've told Martin many times, you just try to leave me, I'll come find you. So I'm joking. Well, no, I'm not actually, but he would never leave. I know that. But they call me different names. They refer to me with all kinds of horrible names. In fact, if you watch the podcast that I filmed about Judge Hirsch, you will hear all the lovely descriptions that he put in his court order. But back to Brandon's case. The judge said, according to Ms. Peters' report, Juror Young had knife training in connection to his job as a rescue swimmer instructor and using and training his students on the use of knives in rescue operations. Are you seeing a pattern here? There's one word that is repeated over and over and over. What is it? Rescue. Rescue. It's in his title. Rescue. Rescue flies in the face of everything that happened to Brandon. Rescue. In addition, according to an interview with Petty Officer Brown, Juror Young would have taught his students to never use the rescue knives as a weapon. Now here the judge is using this as a negative, but to me that's a positive. Juror Young, Foreperson Young, would have taught his students to never use a knife as a weapon. But that's exactly what Brandon did. He used his knife as a weapon to defend himself. It was kill or be killed. So when someone like Foreperson Young teaches his students to never use knives as a weapon and to have the motto, I save lives for a living, How can you say that Brandon got a fair trial by an impartial juror? You can't, not with a straight face. But Judge Dickey did. She said, additionally, the court cannot conclude that Juror Young dishonestly failed to answer the question regarding knife training. Really? So the fact that he was asked, and even the word military training was inserted 3 times, and he still did not speak up about having knives presented to him upon graduation, presenting knives to his students upon graduation, having knives that they carry on their person as their only weapon. Really? You don't think that he should have spoke up about that? Because I do. Finally, Judge Dickey says, the defendant contends that Juror Young believes that in absolutely no situation would a person be justified in using a knife to defend himself just because Juror Young taught his students to never use their rescue knives as a weapon. You're right, Judge Dickey. That is exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying that Foreperson Young could never imagine the horrible, horrific situation that Brandon found himself in, where he had to use his knife as a weapon. You're right. I don't think that he could imagine that. I don't think he could wrap his head around it. And I think it made him angry and that he was embarrassed that a former military man used his knife to kill someone. Again, when it's kill or be killed, what would you have done if you were Brandon? I would have pulled out my pocket knife and I would have used it. That's what I would have done. And I would probably be in prison now fighting for my life. The last thing that Judge Dickey says is, based on the above, the court finds that Juror Young did not fail to honestly answer a material question and was not actually biased against defendant. Consequently, the court finds that the defendant is not entitled to relief on his motion. It is ordered and adjudicated that the defendant's motion for post-conviction relief is denied. Denied. No hearing, no juror interview, no new trial, just denied. Why? Because Judge Dickey said so. That's why. We didn't even get to bring Foreperson Young into court and ask him, why did you not speak up about these things? Were you biased when you found that a young Marine used his knife to take a life? Were you horrified? Were you angry? Were you pissed off? Did that affect your verdict? Of course it did. Of course it did. Now, whether he would admit to that or not, I don't know. Probably not. But you and I both know that we would not have done things differently in Brandon's case and Brandon's life. In fact, read the book. There's so much more in there. Read the book. You will be convinced that Brandon Ward did not get a fair trial by an impartial juror, and that Brandon Ward defended himself. And if he had not done that, Brandon and his family, Brandon would have been dead that night, and his family would have been planning a funeral. And I'm horribly sad for Joseph's family and Joey's family and what they've gone through. But at the end of the day, they were the assailants. They were the ones that came in their minds to kill. Where's Brandon now? Well, he's in prison. Brandon was convicted based on this jury's verdict of guilt. Brandon was convicted of homicide, manslaughter, culpable negligence, second-degree murder, dangerous attempted, and sentenced to 60 years in prison. 30 years for each count, running. I always get that mixed up. Consecutively, so one after another. I'm so sorry, Brandon. You did not deserve this. You deserved a fair trial. You didn't get that. Brandon's release date is August 18th, 2062. He'll be 70-something years old. All because a Marine with training defended himself against two people he didn't even know. He still doesn't understand, according to what he wrote, why they came after him like that. They didn't know him. He didn't know them. What would you have done? Brandon and his family have endured unspeakable pain. In fact, he woke up in the hospital room later that night, handcuffed to a bed, completely in shock as to why he was being charged with a crime. Read the book. Brandon and his family are still fighting. They're still fighting the criminal justice system that failed them. The trial, according to the jury, the verdict was guilty. He was convicted. It was appealed to the appellate court, and those three judges upheld the lower court. Denied again. And now his family has been searching the last several years for another way to bring Brandon home. This is not justice. This is not right. Which is why I wanted to do this podcast. I hope that you understand a little better about how broken our criminal justice system is. And I hope and pray that if you're ever subpoenaed to be a juror, that you will go into court and you will tell the truth. If you're not an appropriate juror for that jury, that you will speak up and say that. Do not, please do not go into that deliberation room with the intention of not considering the facts of the case. I just hope that you will sit there as a juror and look at that defendant and think to yourself, what if that were me? What if that were my son, my father, my brother, my sister? Would I want me on the jury? Thank you for listening. I appreciate all of you who watch my podcast. And I pray that you will help me to hold jurors accountable, hold prosecutors accountable, hold judges accountable. The least that Judge Dickey could have done is grant a hearing. Said no. The law says that a hearing is necessary. Judge Dickey became the law that day and said no. Again, thank you for watching. Appreciate your time. It is valuable. And I pray that you'll tune in next time for another episode of Jurors in Disguise. Remember, the courtrooms may be silent, but we won't be. So speak up, speak out, and always speak the truth. God bless.
What's going on, guys? Thought I'd make this quick video while I was going through some of my old rescue swimmer gear, and it turns out I actually have every issued piece of gear that I received from the schoolhouse. I went through the surface school at Naval Air Station Jacksonville. In 2018, I was class 18008. This is your LPU life preserver. This is the back side of it. It's just a belt that goes around you with a D-ring here. It's called a storage bag. Your gloves, your knives, or whatever. What you wear underneath your LPU is your harness, this contraption here. 2 knives. One was a J-hook knife on a lanyard in a small pouch. Looks like that. And it's just for cutting fabric
or paracord. Cutting it around somebody's clothing if needed. And then a SAR knife. The Life Saving Systems Corporation. Titanium. In a sheath. It's got serrations top and bottom, plain edge, and then a little hook there.